Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. Very humbled to be with, with all of you, but especially my peers, my fellow journalists from around the region. We've got Indonesia, we've got Malaysia, of course. We've got, I think, Singapore-based publication. And we're hoping that more from the rest of the region will join us as we go along. Maybe some people are a little bit late. So I know most of you from your publications, of course, and some of you from your bylines. I know that some of you have already covered the haze, others have covered palm oil, others have covered deforestation. So from different aspects to different levels of depth. Yeah? As we can see, about 30% of those who had answered the poll have not covered any kind of environmental issue before. So I'm going to try and address, I think we're all going to try and address all the different levels sort of things. So, so what I'm going to do is to set the context for today's session, yeah, and then hand you over to the real experts, those with really deep knowledge, and these three experts have that. It's very rare to get this breadth of subject matter panelists together specifically to speak to you guys, especially to journalists. So I hope as we go along, as Danny said, please ask a lot of questions, put them in the chat group, and in the chat, and then we'll try and get to them at the end of every presentation, and the rest of it we'll try and scoop up, and the Kini Academy team are going to put them together at the end, and then hopefully we'll have a good discussion going. If there's not too many of you, and I actually haven't checked with the team about this, but maybe you could put on your mics and we could have a proper discussion. Yeah. So let's see how it goes. Yeah. Okay. So for my presentation, I have drawn mostly from regional publications. Yeah. And the credits are there if you want to read the stories by your fellow ASEAN and international publications. No copyright infringement is intended. These are for presentation purposes only. Yeah. So let me begin with the context of transboundary haze. This is an issue of air pollution. It's an environmental issue. Yeah. Just to bring you right back to basics. Yeah. Air pollution. What is it? Basically, it's the presence of substances in the atmosphere that are harmful to the health of humans and other living beings. They can cause damage to climate. They can cause damage to materials. There are many different types of air pollutants, such as gases, particulates, biological molecules, right? So haze is one type of air pollution. Haze consists of small particles. So with this famous PM 2.5, yeah, smaller than that, very tiny particles that make up enough smoke, dust, moisture, and vapor suspended in the air to impair visibility. So that's what haze is. So you can see a picture of Vietnam, right? Now, when we talk about transboundary pollution, now haze pollution can be said to be transboundary if it is so dense and so extensive at the source where it is produced that it remains at levels that can be measured after it crosses a country's boundary through the air, right? So the definition of transboundary pollution is pollution that originates in one country, but is able to cause damage in another country's environment, okay, by crossing boundaries through water or air. That's transboundary pollution, right? Pollution can be transported across incredible distances from hundreds and even thousands of kilometers. They don't recognize any kind of national boundary at all, right? Now, haze isn't the only type of transboundary pollution. So I just put set the context here. In fact, big environmental pollution problems are very often transboundary. So we have here, of course, plastic pollution. Southeast Asia's plastic pollution is polluting the world. There was a report that 5 countries, 4 of which are from Southeast Asia, are responsible for 60% of plastic residue in the ocean. Okay, and the impacts are many. They impact biodiversity, the economy, human health. Plus, plastic is also transported through the air. Another type of transboundary pollution is oil spills. This is a picture from Malaysia, and it's along the coast of the Straits of Malacca, which is like the busiest shipping lane in the world. So loads and loads of ships go through. We don't know where they're registered necessarily. So when an oil spill like this happens, this coated about 2 kilometers of the coast on the west coast of Peninsula Malaysia. I don't think that there was any actually findings out of this, right? They used drones and everything, and they tried to figure out where did it come from. So the impact also is huge. Biodiversity, obviously, but it's also economic. Fishes, tourism, human health, right? And then the last type of big transboundary pollution is, of course, POPs, persistent organic pollutants. Usually this refers to pesticides, right? So large-scale agriculture, and we're going to be talking a lot about large-scale agriculture. That's where enough of these pesticides are used, and then through the air again, they get transmitted across boundaries. And why are they so harmful? It takes a very long time for them to break down, and they affect biodiversity again, especially pollinators, talking about bees, insects that pollinate, and obviously human health. So that brings us to transboundary haze again. Now, one nature of transboundary haze is that it's seasonal. In ASEAN, yeah, it's seasonal. So for media, why report it when it's not happening? Out of sight, out of mind. So there's one group that thinks that this is newsworthy, and this is the United Nations. In effect, they've decided it's so important, it's got to be highlighted more. In 2019, the UN had a new designated day. You know, the UN has all these different days for this, for that, and the other. It's got one of the prettiest names, I think. It's called the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. And it just passed. It was the 7th of September, right? This is a picture from the Philippines with blue sky. I think we'd all rather be there enjoying the blue sky rather than here in front of a computer on a nice Saturday afternoon. But yes, it's basically to bring attention to the fact that air pollution is a very, very serious problem. So this year is only the second time that they've sort of observed it. And the hashtag is Healthy Air, Healthy Planet, for obvious reasons. We're in the midst of, we're in the grip of COVID, yeah? So health is very, very important. And that's one of the two things that they have decided need attention this year. Now, according to the UN, air pollution is the single greatest environmental risk to human health. I'll repeat that. The single greatest environmental risk to human health. It is also one of the most avoidable causes of death and disease globally. So when I saw this figure, like how much of our world is actually exposed to polluted air, I was really struck. I thought maybe 50%, maybe 60%. According to the UN, it's 92% of our world is exposed to polluted air. And obviously it's not exposed to the same degree. And I'm going to keep coming back to that. The fact that there is impact, the impact is actually unequal in our world, right? So the second thing that they want to highlight for this year's theme is impact on climate. So these little air pollutants, right? They call them short-lived climate pollutants, right? They are the pollutants most linked to what they call near-term, immediate warming of the planet. So now we know all about CO2, climate change, CO2, climate change, CO2. But these little things actually make up like 45% of greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming, okay? And they remain in the atmosphere for a much shorter time than carbon dioxide, and yet the potential to warm the atmosphere may be many, many times greater, okay? So it's great to see that in the poll, the majority of people know and realize that the haze and air pollution are linked to the climate. And Surin actually is going to touch on that. So he's the speaker after me, yeah? Let's look at the impact. So I mentioned a few of the impacts just now. What are the impacts of haze and air pollution? Obviously, it's not just environmental. It is very multifaceted. So what does it impact? It impacts human health. It impacts biodiversity. It impacts the climate. And it impacts the economy and politics. Okay, so these are the this is what makes it very interesting. An environmental problem actually has many, many different facets. And that makes it very interesting and perhaps very challenging to report on, okay? So now let's dive into the ASEAN transboundary haze. Now, in telling stories about transboundary haze, I just want to highlight 2 points, right? Maps. That's really one of the best ways to tell environmental stories as a whole, but certainly when it comes to the haze, okay? Again, out of sight, out of mind, that's what I mentioned just now. There's always an eye in the sky, and that's satellites. And the use of satellite imagery actually makes it very hard for anyone to say, look, it ain't happening, it's not coming from my country, it's not crossing boundaries or anything at all. And there's not just one satellite, there's multiple satellites, right? So I'm going to call your attention to two sort of sources for this kind of maps. One is the ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center, which I think Larry might be coming to. So he's going to give you a fascinating sort of background and intro to the whole ASEAN setup for how this sort of ASEAN center came about, right? And what you're looking at here, so this came from ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and they've used a map from Global Forest Watch. So, so this is the Global Forest Watch map, okay? And basically, they give you very, very clear indications. You can see where the hotspots are. You can see where the most severe ones are and the ones that are not so severe. Now, in terms of the other point I want to just highlight in doing environmental stories is please speak to the scientists, right? Please get your science right, because you know, you really need to do that in order to get your facts really, really accurate before you go on to talk about other elements of this very, very complex problem. So please talk to scientists, meteorologists, air pollution experts, public health experts. Just get the science right. That's really quite critical, right? So what we have here in ASEAN is basically roughly two areas. You can sort of divide the problem into two areas. We've got the southern countries, you can see here, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Timor-Leste. You can see all the way up to here, that this is where the Haze issue is affecting. Now, just several points very quickly, and again, I'm going to leave it to the experts to bring you through this. That basically in the south, it kind of began, big events began in 1997. Now in 2015, the Haze also affected Philippines, and you can't see, it went up to Laos as well. That's how severe it was, yeah? And the costs are many. We've got millions of hectares of land burned, millions of hectares of forest. That includes millions of hectares of forest, billions of dollars being, you know, totaled out. And then you've got carbon emissions as well, and the social costs, education, poverty, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay. And now we're going to move on to the northern part of ASEAN, right? Where there's also transboundary haze. And perhaps the people who live down in the south don't really realize what's happening up in the north, right? And so what you have here, again, use of maps from two different sources. On the left, you have actually got the Thai Space Agency map. Okay, and you can see all the different hotspots here. And this is from a publication which focuses on the Mekong area. And on the right, we actually have a map from NASA. And between these two maps, you can see it's definitely hotspots and transboundary haze happening. Okay, so the northern countries would be Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand. Now, this kind of phenomenon started a bit later in the mid-2000s. It's gotten a lot worse in the last 2 years. 2019, the haze periods were longer and harsher. They also started earlier in the year. Okay, and they blew over to the Philippines. So you know, the transboundaryness of this problem is huge, right? And it's got the same costs of land burned, forest burned, in terms of money, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so I'm going to move on now very quickly to drivers. Now, I'll talk about the current and upcoming drivers. Now, the next three speakers, again, are going to be doing a far better job than me in talking about this. But you can see from this picture immediately, transboundary haze is caused by fire. Okay, now the poll results are very interesting because you've got 100% of people saying, yes, it's oil palm. The next highest is actually infrastructure. That's very interesting. And nobody said maize, which is actually very, very key in the northern Southeast Asian countries. That's a very key source of haze in the northern Southeast Asian countries, right? Now, I'm just going to mention a couple of elements that are usually connected to these drivers. So in the south, in the southern countries, we've got El Nino, Southern Oscillation. That's its full title. We always say El Nino. Just a reminder, it's natural. It's a natural climatic phenomenon which occurs in the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Basically, the surface ocean gets warmer, the winds get weaker, and then that leads to very, very dry conditions, which result in fires that are set, becoming severe, okay? The opposite is La Nina, and that means more wet than usual kind of weather, okay? Other elements that are connected to the southern transboundary haze is the clearing of peatlands in Indonesia to plant oil palm and trees for pulp and paper, all right? And yet another element I just want to point out is, again, the transnational nature of this. Malaysian-owned companies in Indonesia are some of the culprits, okay? Now, going to the north, some of the drivers in the north, right? is the burning of maize plantations primarily. It's not the only thing, but primarily maize plantations during the summer months for animal feed and for biofuels, right? So there's been an expansion of maize farms, huge maize farms in the Shan State, northern Thailand and Laos. Is related to poverty. Farmers are trapped in debt. Okay, so it's different from the South or not. We'll hear from the experts. And again, the transnational nature of this, the largest maize for animal feed invested in Myanmar is a Thai multinational. Okay, so we have human actions, human decisions, and the consequences of that. Surin and Helena coming up are going to be covering that. We're going to hear very, very interesting points from them. They have studied this in great detail, and fantastic. Really looking forward. I'm looking forward to their presentations as well. The other driver, they say, is the lack of an effective ASEAN regional approach. Again and again and again, we hear that every time there's a Haze issue, we hear this. What's ASEAN doing? We need regional to come in. So Larry is going to sort you out there. But I want to also look at other drivers that are current or in the future. I want to look at climate change. Okay, we've got this 1.5 degree thing happening. This is a very big year for climate change again, and as well as for biodiversity loss. World's getting hotter. How is this impacting the Transboundary Haze? We've got COVID-19, okay? And the impact of coming out of COVID-19. Is there a Green New Deal? What is it? Is it ASEAN-wide? Is it going to work in this kind of situation? Just like to throw all these different ideas out there, okay? So those are the drivers. Now we talk about stakeholders. We have a picture here of Singapore. You can see the Merlion there. But we've also got other elements here. We've got a child here. So the stakeholders, the people, obviously, people's health. I'm going to point out again, is there enough coverage of the most vulnerable of societies, children, the poor, indigenous communities? And then obviously this is Singapore. Nations are a stakeholder. So you've got Singapore, little island, completely surrounded by actions that they can't control, right? So they came up with an act to try and do that, to prosecute companies and individuals as well, that cause air pollution in Singapore, outside of Singapore. I don't think they've actually applied that at all. Why? Okay, and again, talking about countries, and we're looking at ASEAN here, who are the most vulnerable countries? Who are the most poor of these countries? How is this actually affecting them? And is it going to continue to do so, right? And then you see all these big buildings here, businesses, big businesses reel from the impact of Transboundary Haze. So we have the financial, manufacturing, tourism, agribusiness especially, and we're going to come into that a lot. Okay, and of course, the final lot of stakeholders I want to mention are the natural world, wildlife, and forest. Okay, so let me come now to narratives. Okay, let's look at how media has been covering this. I'm going to focus on two publications on the South. So bear with me, Malaysia Kini and Tempo. I'm not trying to create a war between the two publications, so bear with me. I'm just using these as examples, right? So what we have here is in 2019. So we had hotspots. So this is the map that you're going to see over and over again. This is from the ASEAN Meteorological Center, which is very, very important. Everybody refers to. So you can see where the hotspots are and how they floated over into Malaysia, as well as the rest of the region as well, right? Timor-Leste is here as well. And then what happened in this piece was they also covered, what happened locally. And basically, they were also pointing out hotspots within Peninsular Malaysia, because it's not all imported. But then what happened was in Tempo, this is the Tempo piece, and what they did was to report of a meteorological department leader who said, oh, no, the haze actually isn't coming, the haze in Malaysia isn't coming from Indonesia. Wow, okay, so what happens then? Then this is a Malaysia Kini article, and this is just a reflection of the whole Malaysian media, and they reacted immediately and said, no, see the map, that this is the haze really came from Indonesia, so it really has been affecting us, And this goes on, it gets escalated. So then, Indonesia claims the haze in KL. So a minister comes in and says this in Indonesia. This is a Malaysia Kini report. And then you've got a Tempo report saying, okay, Prime Minister of Malaysia actually says, okay, Indonesia's in denial, right? So this is from one day to another day. And then the third day, boom, okay, oil palm companies. That is always the narrative that comes through. So blame the oil palm companies. And then the same narrative gets repeated over and over again, by which time everybody is like, all this finger pointing, people are really fed up. And then Tempo comes up with a lovely article on a Spider-Man who tries to save the day. So what you have is a mythical hero who is actually amongst the people and trying to do something practically on the ground. Anyway, this is just to say, okay, how can we raise the narrative? Now, the news folks, you guys have to do your job. You guys have to do your job, but there are like news narratives, news features that perhaps could you include something else? Could you include that the political element rather than just referring to a geographical or a scientific point of view, right? Be careful of national biases. I'm as guilty as anybody else. The use of media by governments and by politicians. Is it an election year? Is the minister under some sort of pressure? Is there mishandling of another environmental problem? Is your company being supported by advertising from a big multinational? So these are all different things. And then, is there opportunity for collaboration between media, which is one of the goals of this project, really, right? So Helena is going to come back at the end by talking about narratives from a very specific point of view, right? So I'm just going to end very quickly here. I think my time is up. And get this going. Okay, so the narrative, as per the title of this session, is basically you have haze, transboundary haze, which is linked to deforestation, which is linked to oil palm. Okay, is this the narrative? So I'm just going to end here and put up the three next speakers to see how you could possibly broaden the narrative and raise the nature of the narrative, right? And that's it from me. Thank you very much.